Thank you for attending this really, I think, powerful session on data and analytics. We have a lot of trends to illustrate for you guys. So without further ado, we're going to give you a very summarized illustration of the U.S. economy. Because when you measure the U.S. economy, you're talking about literally hundreds of thousands of potential variables and drivers, and who wants to go over even 10 of those, right? So what we did is we boiled all of that down. I mean, we literally have a database with millions of time series data, and we boiled it down to one single index. We call it the TPSI. For those of you who know who we are, it stands for 1,000-point strength index. So what I'm going to show you in a moment is an index in which 500 is equilibrium. It's that moderate equilibrium level. It's neither strong nor weak. Anything above 500 is relative strength. Anything below 500 is relative weakness, okay? So just to give you your bearings on this single index that you can wrap your hands around the entire economy. So there it is. Thank you, Lee. So we're pretty much crazy when it comes to analytics. And over the several decades we've been working together, we have gathered data and many sources, some probably orthodox, some very unorthodox, going back to January of 1792. Yes, you heard that right, 1792. And this is the index from that early date all the way to January of 2024. Now, one thing I can tell you right now about trends and cycles, whether it's economic, social, or psychological, is that everything in this world pretty much behaves in a cycle. The cycles that have occurred since 1792 today, it's almost like clockwork. Whether it's World War I, World War II, the invention of the airplane, the invention of the automobile, the pandemic, it does not matter. Things behave in cycles. So what we're going to do here is we're not going to go through all 31 cycles that we've experienced since 1792. We're going to expand this, or magnify this rather, to, let's magnify it just a little bit more. There we go. That's kind of a nice illustration from October of 2014 to January 2024, right? You can see the recession here. So what does this summarize? Really simply, that if we have our bearings on this 500 level, which is here, our current TPSI is 381.5. And 381 is a relatively low number. Yes, there are strong indicators out there, like the employment growth that just came out this past Friday. That's good. But there are plenty of other indicators that are troublesome. Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan Chase, he just recently said, hey, we're going to be driving off a cliff. Okay, we don't believe that that's going to happen, and I think it's a little over-exaggerated. But we do believe that there is going to be some tough sledding ahead in 2024, albeit we are cautiously optimistic, okay? Now, you can see the trend line that went from a black diamond ski slope going down. It's starting to sort of slow and decelerate slightly, which is a slightly good sign. But again, I think there's going to be some tough sledding in 2024 as we get our bearings. Now, another way to look at this is to take a group of drivers, right, that are known as positive drivers, drivers that have shown growth, that have shown positive trends over the last 3 months, 6 months, say year, versus trends that are downshifting and doing poorly. So one of the things we did several years ago is we created a very simple bucket, right? Good drivers versus bad drivers. It's really simple. In fact, we actually call this the up-down chart internally. And what this shows is the red line shows the number of drivers that are doing poorly. Year over year, 3 month over 3 month, they're just not doing as well. They're decreasing, so to speak, whereas the green drivers are doing well. Now let's magnify this as well, because we've got a lot of early time series in there. So let's just magnify that a little bit more. There we go. So do you guys see that 10,744? In this segment of drivers, this is only a very small segment of all the TPSI drivers we use. There are 10,744 as of this month that have shown weak downshifting trends, right? Where there's only 5,759 that have shown positive growth. So is this a warning for cataclysmic economic behavior? No, but it's something in which you should say, let's tread cautiously. Anyone telling you it's rosy, it's phenomenal, the economy's taking off, and there's nothing to worry about, turn around, ignore them, and run the opposite direction, okay? This is not cataclysmic economic news, it's just remain cautiously optimistic. I'll give you just a couple of quick indicators before we bring Michael up, who's really going to go over the fun stuff. I'm jealous. Sales trends, price index trends, elastic demand, all that. This is the yield curve. For those of you that don't know what the yield curve is, it's essentially taking long-term rates and subtracting a short-term yield. This should always, or should be, typically positive, right? You should make more money on a long-term yield than a short-term. And so what happens is when it's negative, it's called an inverted yield curve. And we've had an inverted yield curve since about November 2022. And it's not re-inverted since then. And it's still stayed fairly low. So again, just giving you one piece of evidence that, again, in and of itself, it's not tragic, but that, hey, things are not back to where you want them to be. Okay? And finally, this is a recession probability model, and it shows that as of this past month, with a lot of different indicators and subject matter experts from Wall Street, according to this model, there's a 77.95% chance we're going to hit a recession this year. So, with that now, I want you to welcome Michael up, because I have never really seen a human being consume more Dayquil in the last 24 hours than I have. So, Michael, good luck, and he's have a lot of great information for you. Thank you.
Apologize if I'm a little foggy, but that's what 2 doses of Dayquil will do to you. So let's get into some sales trends first, and then we'll get into some price elasticity as well, which has been a really hot topic lately for a lot of our clients in all industries. So what you're looking at here, let me go into full screen, is a sales index. So these aren't sales numbers. We're not allowed to actually show sales numbers, but this is an index. So we've indexed sales, right? And you see, obviously, a lot of seasonality. And you're well aware that there's a lot of seasonality in motorcycle sales. So let's get rid of that so we can actually look at the actual long-term trend here. So we'll take a moving average of 12 months. And now we can see this trend. So what does this say? So from the beginning here of February 1996, sales have grown 80.6% from that point. But that's a long time ago. So let's actually get rid of this anomaly here, this big spike in the early 2000s. So we're going to change this date here. Oops. And we'll just get this recent trend. So from January 2011, overall motorcycle sales have grown 24.69%, which is healthy. You see this COVID effect right here, and then now kind of the deceleration, but actually a recent bump too, which is positive. And we can actually click through all these different segments. So you see competition, which is an off-road segment, cruiser, which is kind of a dwindling segment, as you can see, fit down 50% from 2011. Dual, another sort of off-road segment. Again, that's been a very healthy segment. Scooter, not so much. Sport bike, down a bit. Touring, also down. Traditional, up big time, but this is, the segment, it has expanded, so it includes a lot more types of motorcycles in it, so it's kind of skewed. It's not really what we call same store sort of analysis. And then trail other, also up. But let's look at all those at once. So you can see we have the sales traditional way up there, sales adventure, and then these segments here are all off-road segments. And you can see that COVID effect that it had on off-road, and you're well aware of that with ATVs, side-by-sides, and all off-road motorcycle segments. COVID resulted in a huge spike in sales because of just outdoor activities. And they've remained pretty healthy since then. I mean, they flattened, but they haven't really gone down that much. So they're still, compared to 2011, it's still really, really doing really well. Now let's take a look at price. Let's go to price, weighted average. So overall in that time period, prices are up 2.58%, so pretty flat. Right? And you can see, especially during COVID, they decreased a lot as well. And we can click through the different segments. And you'll notice a trend here, and I'll get to it in a second when I show all of them. They've all gone up fairly healthy. But if we benchmark it against inflation, let's look at all of these at once here so we can see it. The highest is 35.98%. Inflation over this time period was 39.6%. So none of these segments have kept up with inflation. Oh, low battery. Hold on. Let me make sure that's plugged in. Yep, there we go. Don't want to die on me. So pretty interesting. Now let's take a look at sales versus price. Now this has been, again, a really hot topic recently. We've done a lot of price elasticity training for a lot of our clients, whether it's Powersports, grocery stores, pharmaceutical drugs. They all work on the basis of supply and demand and price elasticity. So what happens when I raise my price 1%? My sales go down X%. That's what we're looking to calculate. And we can see the relationship here between price and sales. It makes sense. You raise the price, sales go down. Decrease the price, sales go up. But there's a lot of other externalities going on in this chart. Because it's not the correlation. You can see you kind of got dots way out here and way down here. You're like, what's going on? Well, we have seasonality, right? So if I click on the different months, there are different parts of the demand curve, which makes sense. It's a very seasonal market or very seasonal industry. And we can account for that. That's actually really easy to account for in a price elasticity model. The other things affecting that are the economy, right? When the economy's strong, it doesn't matter what your price is. Sometimes you can charge as much as you want and they'll still buy it. If the economy's really weak, it doesn't matter how much you lower your price, they're still not going to buy it. So you have to account for that as well. And we're actually going to dive into both of those. Now, when you go to extract price elasticity and try to calculate it, and I'm going to get pretty dorky on you, so bear with me. You have to make the line linear first so you can actually calculate that, right? Well, I'll dive into this a little later. It's a bit boring, but it's actually really easy to do. It just takes a little training, and you'll be able to calculate your price elasticity for any product you have. Now let's take a look at sales versus the macroeconomy. So if we overlay sales with all the economic indicators, because we have hundreds of thousands of economic indicators, we want to try to find indicators that drive sales, right? So when job growth goes up by 100,000 jobs, how does that affect my sales? And not only how does it affect my sales, when does it affect my sales? So people get jobs, 6 months later they buy stuff, right? So we want to find that lead, what we call. The correlation. It's not only about correlation, it's about the lead time too. And typically job growth, it doesn't matter what the industry is, like 6 to 8 months. So this we're looking at all sales versus advanced retail sales. Right? You see there's some correlation. COVID kind of threw a wrench into everything, even our models, which we now had to account for. Let's look at employment. Now, if I look at employment on an aggregate, this is this weird looking black line, that's just total number of jobs. There's no correlation there. It's not just about looking at indicators, it's about looking at the calculation of that indicator. What they quote in the newspaper all the time is job growth, right? Whether it's a number or a percentage, not the aggregate number. So we'll look at job growth, and then you can see it lock in, how it correlates. So it's not just looking at just overlays of data, it's different calculations of the data as well. We'll just click through a few of these. Average hourly earnings. And look at this one. So in some instances, it almost looks like it's an inverse or opposite correlation. Look at this is going down, the black line's going down, and sales are going up. That doesn't make sense. It's because it actually leads. This is June, and that's April of the following year. It's a 10-month lead for this indicator. So what happens in average hourly earnings, 10 months later, people buy stuff when they go up. So that's what we need. That's what we're looking to extrapolate when we're trying to find the indicators that drive our business. We'll go through a few more of these. Personal consumer expenditures. You can see you can overlay just about anything, right? But it really gets tough narrowing down which indicators are actually the ones driving our business. Because a lot of indicators will correlate, but not causate. So just because they correlate doesn't mean that actually drives your business. It could just be happenstance. So it's hard to do that. And that's where the art and science of forecasting comes in. You can't just rely strictly on the math. You have to rely on your subject matter expertise to build out a model. David and I teach a course called The Art and Science of Predictive Analytics. It is an actual art. So how do we determine what indicators to use? Well, first, how do we get this data, right? Where do you get the data from? Have you ever heard of the FRED? The Federal Reserve website. Hundreds, I think like 800,000 plus economic indicators that you could pull down automatically. So you can go and download data if you just want to do some like quick ad hoc analysis and overlay job growth with some of your sales. But they also have add-ins and APIs, like an Excel add-in if you're familiar with Excel, which I'm sure most of you are. You can just have an Excel add-in and download as much data as you want and overlay it with your sales and conduct all sorts of analytics within Excel. What we do, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, is we pull this data automatically via workflows. This is an ETL tool. Right? And they're actually becoming more popular now. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see more of these in the future, these Canvas code-free sort of drag-drop programs, which if you like Excel, you love ETLs because it takes away Excel hell. You run out of columns and rows eventually, right? If you have a lot of data. So what this workflow does is just pull data. It pulls hundreds of thousands of indicators and then lets me build something like this, where I can overlay your metric, this is a sales metric, for off-highway, and this is an economic indicator. And down below, I have a table of thousands of indicators ranked by their correlation and how much they lead my sales. And so now I can go through this dashboard and kind of pick and choose the ones not only that correlate, but that I think, with my expertise, actually drive my sales. And so let me pick out a specific example here and walk you through the visualization a little bit. So I'm going to go to the housing market. So we have different segments, obviously. So economic indicators are typically just thrown into segments like housing, employment, prices, and so forth. And I'll click on houses sold, conventional houses sold. And we can see, so the blue line, again, is our sales. That's our sales growth. And the black line is the economic indicator, which is houses sold by type of financing, conventional. And what this model says, what this table says right here is this little 6 right here says, this indicator leads my sales by 6 months. Right? And I built a parameter in here just so we can actually visually see that. So if I start shifting that black line over month by month until I get to 6, it locks right in. So that's the maximum correlation. So now I can generate a forecast using this metric, but actually I don't even need to do a forecast. I'll get a free 6-month forecast pretty much because the historical data is already there. Now it's just what happens 6 months from now with my sales. So that's the part you go through. It's exhausting. So I'll go through this for a lot of our clients and pick out a handful of indicators that I think correlate, and then I'll jump to another model, which I show you. But the overall idea is to build a robust forecast model or an accurate forecast model with as few indicators as possible, right? You don't want to throw hundreds of indicators into your model and try to forecast because you're just going to build a model that is specific to that historical data. It's called overfitting, and you don't want to do that. So it's just find 3 to 5 primary metrics that you think drive sales and actually correlate statistically and generate forecasts using that, not hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. Because they also correlate to each other, like job growth and advanced retail sales and personal consumer expenditures. They also correlate to one another, so pick one, right? You don't need all of them. And the way we do that, again, is through, who's heard of linear regression? Please raise your hand. Please, thank you. So basically, I'm using just basic linear regression. I'm not gonna dive into this table. Don't worry. There's just a lot of numbers, and I don't want to bore you too much. But what I'm doing is I'm trying to forecast sales using 9 different drivers. So I have X1 through X9, right? And what this regression is going to do is tell me which one's the most significant. So say I've went through 100,000 indicators. I've narrowed it down to 9 that I want to test. You run through a linear regression like this, again, which is very simple. You can do this in Excel. And it will tell you which ones are the most significant to your sales. So that's what we use linear regression for. But you do have to be careful because sometimes linear regression results won't make sense. So this is what we call, I'm not going to get into the coefficient, but you see these numbers right here, negative and positive. What this means is that when this variable goes up, X1, whatever that is, when it goes up, your sales go down. Right? And sometimes in a linear regression, if you put too much data into it, too many indicators, those coefficients won't make sense. So the job growth one, for example, will be negative. And it's like, when job growth goes up, my sales don't go down. And that's because your model's biased, right? You got to fix your model. You have too many indicators in your model. Yeah, but that's where I'll stop on linear regression. So once we run a linear regression and we've isolated, say, the 5 indicators that we want to forecast, that we want to use to forecast, we build a forecast model. So this is an off-road forecast model using 5 indicators, right? You can see these listed here. And this is just kind of primer on the forecast model. So the first step when you're going to do a forecast is 1, you find the indicators that drive your sales. 2, you have to forecast those indicators, too, depending on how much they lead, of course. So if you want a 5-year forecast, you're then going to have to, create a forecast for job growth first of 5 years. So all models have some assumptions in them, obviously. I mean, if I was really, really good at my job, I wouldn't be working. I'd be living in Vegas. So we have 5 drivers here, and each one, right now I'm showing 1-year forecast. This is actually a 5-year forecast model, but I'm only allowed to show 1 year. So we first forecast each driver, okay? And this is a model where we give to our clients so they can actually input their own forecasts too. So they don't really want to rely on our forecast because we provide our forecasts. They can actually input via these input boxes here their own forecast for job growth, say. This is another chart that shows the overlay, like I just showed you, the overlay model, but it also interprets what happens with the relationship. So this is e-commerce sales, for example. And what this says down here is a 1% increase in e-commerce sales will result in a 0.47% increase of off-road sales 4 months later. Right? So determining those relationships is obviously key when you're building that forecast model. Another cool thing that I'll spend a minute on, and some of you may have seen this depending on if you paid attention in stats class, is the correlation matrix. Right? And so we have all the indicators in our model, right? We have off-road sales. That's what we're trying to forecast, are known as our dependent variable. And then we have our 5 metrics, our 5 macro metrics that we're using to forecast. Right? And this matrix shows how all of them correlate to one another. Right? So you can see that sales correlate perfectly. Now these numbers range from +1 to -1. 1 being a perfect correlation, -1 being a perfectly inverse correlation. And you can see, obviously, when it's correlated to itself, it's perfectly correlated. It's just the same data. It's positively correlated to the housing price index. It's negatively correlated to federal debt and so on. But what's also important is you can see how the other metrics correlate to one another too. So, because if you have two metrics in your model that correlate really well to each other, you got to throw one out or build two separate models that have one of those indicators in each model. So there's a lot of rules when you go to build a forecast model. And then finally, we get to our forecast. So with all of those forecasts, we then have, well, briefly, let me show you what's going on here. So actual sales is the blue line. Again. The gray line is our model. So based on the movement of those 5 macro indicators, I could build that gray line, which is about, it's known as an R squared, which is the goodness of fit, basically. This is about 95%. And so what does that mean? I can explain 95% of the fluctuation in off-road sales with those 5 economic indicators. Anyone want to guess what the other 5% is? Price. So this model only has economic indicators in it. Now, what we're missing in this one is price, and I'm going to get into that in a second as well. Then we have an aggregate forecast. So you can see on aggregate, what we're forecasting for 2024 for off-road is, again, still strong sales compared to where you were in 2011, especially with COVID. And obviously it's flattened a bit, but still strong. Historically speaking, they're still strong. And then on an annual basis, we could see that as well. So we have our trend, we have the decrease all through 2022. 2023 was actually a good year. It was better than last year for off-road. And then 2024 is forecast to be about on par, maybe a little less. Now let's dive into some pricing. Okay. Back to price and quantity. So this is actual data for a specific segment, which I am not allowed to say. You can guess if you want. We have the MSRP and on the vertical axis and the sales on the horizontal. And you can see that correlation. It's very tight. Again, there's also seasonality. But what if we look at it by year too? Let me click on the years here. That doesn't make sense. It's positively correlated. Okay. So when price goes up, in 1999, when price went up, sales went up. Yeah, it did. Not because of price elasticity or the law of demand, because of the economy. Right? So that's why we have the economy, and then we have price. Because you'll see demand curves like this all the time until you account for the economics behind it. And in fact, an example, we just did a price elasticity model for extended stay hotels. Okay? And when I plotted their sales or their bookings, their reservations, versus their average daily rate for a hotel, it was positive. And it made no sense. And until I accounted for, in their case, competitors. Right? So when I look at, they've typically, with their competition, probably in this industry too, when you raise your price, your competitors raise your price. And so forth, so forth. So it's really hard to decipher price elasticity until you account for the competitor's price as well. And then you can start to see actually how the demand curve will form based after you correct that. So again, with price elasticity, so what does this line tell me? How can I extrapolate the function of this line? So this is a logarithmic line, whatever that means, right? There's the equation. Now what the hell do I do with this? How do I get my price elasticity for, say, my side-by-sides? If I raise my price by 5%, what's going to happen to my sales? How do I get that? Well, first step, we make that line linear, and this is called feature engineering. I know I'm going to get dorky on you again. It's just variable transformation. I'm going to take a calculation of MSRP and a calculation of sales to be able to, and then feed that into a regression to tell me what the price elasticity is. And it'll literally tell you right in a table what it is after you feed it, after you transform the data. So now I'm going to take you briefly, again, back to a table with a bunch of numbers in it. And so I fed sales and MSRP into this model and seasonality. So I had to count for the seasonality in here, which is these monthly numbers. But I have this number right here. MSRP log, negative 3.64%. What that means is when I raise my price 1%, my sales go down 3.64%. And this model is pretty accurate. It's about 80% accurate. And this is just price, not even accounting for macroeconomic variables. So that's how you get the elasticity menu. You could do that for each segment, each product, whatever you like. In fact, we did it for a grocery store for thousands of products. And I'll show you an example of that. So this is, once you're able to get that equation, it's actually fairly simple to then build a chart like this, either in Excel or whatnot, and kind of build out a what-if model. Like, okay, what if I raise price by 2%? What happens? You just come over here. What if I raise price 5% and watch the dot? Okay, my price went up 5% and my sales went down to $3,058. What if I lower my price 10%? Okay, my price is $5,599 and my projected sales are $5,362. It may seem complicated, it's actually not. It's actually pretty easy to calculate this stuff. All you need is data and Excel. That's it. And then I'll show you lastly here, I have a chart, again, similar to the forecast model. The blue line is actual sales. And the gray line is my model, just using price and seasonality. Right? And you can see it's pretty tight, especially over since 2011. But the separation here, that's concerning. And that's where the macroeconomic variables are needed in this model. Right? So you can't just rely on price and you can't just rely on economic variables. You have to have all your internal metrics and the external forces accounted for in a robust model. Actually, I'll show you. So this is an example of a dashboard. I won't dive into it too deep, for a grocery store. So I'm measuring the price elasticity of watermelons, right? Look at the data. Look at the sales and the quantity sold. It's a perfect demand curve. And once you extrapolate that, you can do all these things from Econ 101. I'm sure you remember Econ 101, right? Elasticity demand, marginal revenue equals marginal cost is where my profit's maximized. That's what we're doing here. It's simple law of demand here. 0.84 is the optimized price. I actually just did this for one of our Powersports clients as well, telling them what the optimized price is for their certain segment based on their cost. Okay. Lastly, just for fun, and I guess we can open it to Q&A, Super Bowl prediction. So we did this for UCI on Monday, because I have a few minutes here. We always do this every year. We do a Super Bowl prediction, and all the employees at our company build their own Super Bowl model. Right? And so my model is obviously based on historical performance of each team during the regular season. Okay? And you can see this is just a table summarizing the average metrics, or certain metrics. I only use a handful of metrics in my model to forecast the score. So I have the average passing yards for the Chiefs are each team throughout the season. Average passing yards, rushing yards, and turnovers. And then the average passing yards they typically give up, the rushing yards they typically give up, and the forced turnovers. And so I have those metrics for each team, and then I also do an average of that. So when the Chiefs play, they typically gain 240 or pass for 246 yards, right? And the 49ers typically only give up 215. Right? So their defense is pretty good. And so I take an average of those and then feed that into my model to get a sort of consensus model. And I'll show you what we got here. So I have 3 scenarios. I have an offense-based scenario. So if each team performs how they've done throughout the season on average offensively, that's the score. 19.87 to 30.59. Obviously we have to round because you can't score decimals in football. Now the defense-based scenario, now if each team only gives up typically what they give up during a game, 15.39 to 17.12, much closer. Now if we take the average, we do a consensus, 16.61 to 24.5, yeah. Pretty much San Francisco by about a touchdown. I think the spread right now is like 2, which kind of blows my mind, but it's hard to bet against Mahomes. So with that, we can open it up to Q&A if you like. If you have any questions, for either David or myself.
What about price cliffs? How does that affect price elasticity?
Price cliffs in what sense?
Like, $2,599 as opposed to $2,620.
Yeah, that's actually a great question.
Price cliffs?
Price cliffs. So that's what we did. We actually did that for an apartment company. Yes, and that does have a psychological impact. And what we found is that actually even numbers sell better than the 99.99s because the consumers are catching on. They're not idiots. Like,
there's also, pricing is an art and a science as well. Even though, hotels are bearing the problem with this, where they're running algorithms blindly, right? You'll go on, or airlines, you'll go online and you'll notice the prices are changing like by the hour, by the minute, right? And what they're not realizing is it pisses off consumers and buyers. And so we're trying to teach our clients, you might have the black box in the algorithm, but it's not fitting to the human perception, soul, intuition, whatever you want to call it. And so apartments are starting to do this, where they're saying, wow, we can get 12% rent hike mathematically, but the cliff happens when they ignore what's going to happen when you send the renewal notice and your rent is now $485 more. And that sends a human shockwave. So again, we teach this on the master's level. We try to explain to our clients that even though you mathematically could theoretically get a price bump, that doesn't mean you should do it.
Yeah.
And so that's where the art and science of price optimization comes in.
Yeah, you can't listen to the math blindly.
That's right.
You have to use your experience and what's good for the consumer as well.
It is a long-term game too, right? You want to embrace your customers. So, any other questions about demand,
That was a good
demographics?
question.
Yeah, good question. Thank you very much. Anything about anything I covered at the Lunch and Learn if you were there? Blue Ocean Strategy, which we covered yesterday about technology and innovation. And if not, we'll just be down here. And you can give us your private comments, criticisms, recommendations, or other questions. Boston Red Sox, go Sox. 49ers.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I wonder
Go ahead.
should you pop up my model? I did I don't know if it's
I don't know
sunk.
if I have it.
You may not have it. I did a Super Bowl. We do a Super Bowl predictive analytics event at UCI every year for our clients and the students we teach, and the students online from my Switzerland cohort. And I did a different model this year. I did an ELO model. Does anybody know what the ELO index is? It's sort of an index, a power index that measures chess players' prowess. So I took the ELO index and applied it to the NFL teams, and that was fun. But this year, there's a lot of talk about Brock Purdy's experience versus Mahomes, right? And so this is what we do at Competitive Analytics for all our clients. We sort of ask ourselves interesting questions. I'm like, wow, experience, that's a cool concept.
There you go.
Let me see if I can grab every single player in the NFL that's ever played, how many years they played, what their age, height, and weight are. I want a complete profile of their experience and their makeup. So, we're nuts, just like all the data from 1798 to today. And we built an experiential program. I have it? No way,
right there?
dude. Okay, I didn't know I shared that with you. Damn. I was going to keep that to myself.
Maybe I stole it.
Yeah. Just don't bet on it. Okay, so what I did was, what's it set to here? Age. Okay, so let's switch that over. So I took the experience. By the way, it'll blow you away that like the average experience in the NFL for a player is like 3.5 years. You would think, oh my God, yeah, these players are here for 10, 12 years. No. The average is 3.5, meaning there's a lot of players that play 1 or 2 years and you never hear from them again, right? So anyway, I built a model looking at experience versus points scored and yards, just every metric you can imagine. This is a simple one. And without going into a lot of laborious detail, those are all the teams. I started to filter out just the playoff teams. Now, did you notice immediately there starts to be a bit of a correlation there, right? It's kind of an eye test, right? Not much of a correlation. Oh, damn, if you make the playoffs, there seems to be a positive correlation with years of tenure in the league, bless you, with points scored. And then I started filtering it a bit more, right? You know, by the way, this is part and parcel of working with data. It's not this black box coding with this geek hiding in a closet does. A lot of it is working with the executive staff or middle management or any staff in the company and playing with the data, like throwing paint at a wall. Some of our best ideas came after surfing or writing a song, and then you say, hey, what if I throw this variable up with this variable? It's kind of what I did here with this model. And I just started playing with the data until it just came out, and you're like, oh, damn, this looks interesting. So if we just go a little further here, sample size is low, but still you start to see a very, very discrete pattern here. What this tells you is that the San Francisco 49ers have more experience, and that experience is yielding more points. This is one model, and I did build a few other models. So this is saying that the San Francisco 49ers will have an advantage in the Super Bowl. However, I don't think you have this model. I built another model, which was in the beginning of the season. Who here is a Miami Dolphin fan? Anybody? Anyway, they're a fan. I'm like a fan of theirs. And I was sick of hearing them say, they're going to the Super Bowl and they have an amazing team. And they're beating up on really horrible teams and then never winning any team that had a winning record. So I built a power model that took, and this was an interesting idea, because there's only 17 games in the NFL, where there's 162 in baseball, for example, and 82 in the NBA. I took every game in the NFL and converted it into 10 games. So I said, look, if you win, if you're a really good team and you beat up on a really weak team, that kind of feels like a 6-4 record, right? That one win gets translated into 6 wins and 4 losses. I wanted to balance who you were playing with, you know, the strength of schedule. And so I did this whole thing, and I don't have an illustration for this, but it's really interesting. The Chiefs actually beat the 49ers. If you look at a model on strength of schedule, the Chiefs do better against better teams, whereas the 49ers do not. And in that model, the Chiefs actually come out victorious. So I know I'm kind of hedging my bets here, but right now I've got the Chiefs winning those type of models, San Francisco winning more of the experiential models. However, we all teach about ensemble modeling and mixing models together, and when you mash the whole two together, we have the 49ers winning. I have my model winning 24-23 by 1 point. But again, this is going to be a very difficult Super Bowl. So the disclaimer is, don't take any of our information and gamble and then blame us.
We are not financial advisors.
Yeah, we are not financial advisors or gambling advisors. But anyway, it's really interesting because when we do sports analytics or predictive analytics of sports, the crossover to dealerships, to parts, to power sport demand, it's all the same, right? Instead of demand and sales, you've got victories and yards gained versus yards given up. It's all analogously the same. It just depends on how you leverage the data and model it. And by the way, anybody tells you there's one way to model your forecast for your sales or one model that's the best at doing something, they're bullshitting, they're lying, run away, and don't believe them. Because in the ecosystem of analytics, and especially predictive analytics, there is no one model that's the panacea. The philosophy that we take is you got to build many models, hundreds of different models and scenarios, if you will, and then you just take them all and you build a distribution curve. You plot them all, and then you take the median of all the model outputs. Because nobody on earth, even the stuff that we do, and we have our favorite models, can tell you at the end of the day before an event happens that model is going to be the best. No one really knows, right? It's the future. However, what you can do, it's called a gravitational model or a gravitational pull. You build a whole bunch of models, like we've got the experiential model for the San Francisco 49ers. You've got the strength of schedule model for the Chiefs. 2 different outputs. I ran for my event, I think 16 different models. And now you start to see a distribution of where the gravitation of the models, flows to. And I think when you're dealing with, say, the forecast sales for your company, that's what you want. There is no panacea, magic pill, or Amazon cloud-based, algorithm or ChatGPT-based model that's going to give you your answer. Okay? It's just not. You need to build an ensemble of different approaches. One more story before we maybe take 1 or 2 more questions, which is really, really important because you know that we're the data guys, right? And we're building all these algorithms. We got a client in the real estate industry who's been in building, operating apartments for 50 years. We've been a client of theirs since our inception 24 years ago. And we do the forecasting for them and a whole bunch of demand analysis for the last 24 years. But every year before our forecast, the chairman of the board and president comes to us, kind of like this, I'm not exaggerating. Hey guys, we're gonna do 4.25% next year. You mark my words. He's never opened up a computer in his life. He doesn't even know what data science is. But I just gave a presentation up in Silicon Valley to a whole bunch of academic PhDs and CEOs from Netflix and Apple and Google. And I told them this: I'll take his forecast, right? Imagine he's a Powersports manufacturer, right? I'll take his forecast over every one of you PhDs in the audience every day, twice on Sunday, right? And he's not building a model, but he knows his industry and his business way better than you can ever imagine. So what we teach in the classroom, what we tell our clients is, take his input to heart and build it in as a scenario, just like the 2 NFL scenarios we just talked about, and integrate it into the more data science, more quantitative left brain model. Now you've got both qualitative and quantitative and left brain, right brain working together. We've done studies on this. A pure quantitative model will beat a pure intuitive qualitative model pretty much every day. However, a quantitative model mixed with qualitative intuitive models will beat a purely isolated quantitative model every day, twice on Sunday. And we've done studies on this. So what I'm saying is, if you ever want to do forecasts, it's okay to take opinions and experiences. It's a valuable forecast technique, if you will. We think it is. Anyways, with that, we'll take whatever questions you have, maybe 1 or 2 more at the mic, and if we don't get one, we'll be down there and you guys can kind of, whisper in our ear something. Is that it? Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much.
And we'll see you next year.
Appreciate it. Thank you.